Sanctuary was never meant for humankind.
Greetings, Nephilim. The Splinter here, and today we'll be talking about Diablo 4. So after taking some time following the closed beta, I've got some thoughts. So Friday, March 17th marked the opening of the Diablo 4 closed beta, open to pre-order customers and anyone who had a code. Launch, it was a bit rocky. We had server issues earlier in the day which necessitated implementing a queue that took so freaking long to get through. On top of that, looking through the forums and personal experiences written there, we had some extreme levels of instability. There were multiple instances where even I found myself facing disconnects, and this was late at night. I had rubber banding and just some general funkiness. But before we go forward, I'm going to offer some bullets, starting with pros. The current iteration of Sanctuary feels alive. On more than one occasion, I came across some red shirt NPCs fighting enemies in the wild, and while they all ended up dead, it did add some life into the desolation. With that said, Sanctuary has been updated to really reflect the state of the world. It's a dirty, famine-stricken place in the midst of, its 5th or 6th apocalypse. On more than one occasion, NPCs can be heard of having joined a military just to have food. And I can't remember if it was in Diablo 3, I'm a lapsed player, but there's public events. Two that really stood out to me were a caravan rescue where you had to face several waves of enemies to save cowering survivors, and there was also a blood totem event where you stand on 4 platforms to power the main totem with blood. Both I really enjoyed. The game, it still looks like Diablo. The graphics have been improved significantly, and while it doesn't look like Diablo 2, it definitely feels like an evolution of Diablo 3 visually. For my 5th point, I could go on all day about things I liked, but let's round out the pros with this. It really does feel like time has passed since Reaper of Souls. The way some of the NPCs talk about just periphery events to the events that we experienced in D2 and D3, it's clear that some of what humanity had to face, especially during the Reaper crisis, it's fallen out of public memory a little bit. But with all that I liked about the beta, there were some downsides. And now I'm going to acknowledge that most of my nitpicks are with the build that we're playing, and I also acknowledge and admit that it's likely not even the current build of the game, and a lot of the issues have probably been fixed with whatever the current build is. However, if you're going to be playing it this coming weekend, optimization is a bit of a concern. There were multiple situations where frame rates would absolutely plummet, and I can say this isn't a hardware issue on my end. I'm not trying to brag, but I've got a Ryzen 9 7900X. I've got 32 gigs of 6,000 megahertz RAM. I'm running the game off M.2 NVMe drives and an RTX 3070, and this build was assembled less than 2 months ago. So I can tell you definitively, the build's not the issue. I've got a 400 megabit down connection with like 100 megabits up, so my network's not the problem. I just think this build has been poorly optimized. Also, server stability is a bit of a problem. And this appears to have mostly been fixed after day 1 of the closed beta, but I do have some concerns for next weekend considering the player's server population is likely going to be orders of magnitude larger than what we saw, since it'll be an open beta. Now this is a me thing, but I find story bosses to be a bit of a concern. Since everything scales to your level, there is no over-leveling to prepare for a tough fight. I won't complain about their health, but I do think it needs to be scaled back by about maybe 5%. Nothing crazy, but just a little bit. But my main concern is with their combat styles. You see, their combat styles can feel really cheap and unfair to some players, especially players that aren't hardcore Diablo 3 or 4 players, depending on how you want to slice that. In one mission, we fight a demon for a Herodric tomb. Surrounding this tomb, it's a book. Surrounding this book is a slowing field, and once you knock the demon down to about 50 to 75% health, they spend the majority of the remaining fight camping in the slowing field. And I'm not sure if this is intended behavior or just a quirk of the build, but for me I found it very frustrating to deal with without having to rely on stunning abilities. Now some towns do feel a little bit too big, and while that's great for storytelling and building, as a central hub it's a little extra. Personally, I prefer the smaller zones with everything relatively close together. And again, for me, this is an absolute personal gripe, and I'll wind up being in the minority here. Now, granted, if they fix the optimization to where we don't lag as hard in the main cities, it'll probably not be as big of a deal, but I found myself getting caught on walls way too often. Now, finally, and I feel that I'm being objective here with my opinion, but it's still an opinion. I completely, totally, and with zero compunction hate the ability screen as it's currently designed. It feels unnecessarily spread out among multiple nodes, and I get what Blizzard was going for here, and hats off to them for trying something new. But if we want to be honest with ourselves, Diablo 2 did the ability screen the best. It was compact, not hard to navigate, and even Diablo 3's ability screen, even with its fewer abilities, it was way better. So if there's any main quality of life updates to be made, assuming that again it hasn't already been made, Blizzard really needs to simplify the ability screen into something a little bit more compact. Maybe multiple subpages for the different skill types would be better. I don't know, I'm not a UI designer, but as a gamer, a player, it's not very user-friendly. So before we call it, some final thoughts. Diablo 4, at least for me, it felt good. Once I had a solid basic understanding on how everything worked together and figured out a basic rotation, the game, while feeling challenging at times, was overall fun. World mobs, I love them. I could charge into a group knowing that unless I got distracted or just didn't care, there was a negligible risk of death, even though it was still there. The dungeon sellers, the larders, etc., numerous, tons of them. And they were a great way to grind for gold and new gear. There's one specific shrine peppered about that I really enjoyed. And it was basically a greed shrine. And as a whirlwind barbarian, let me tell you, cash money. Because when you're whirlwinding, it drops 1 gold for every hit you land on the enemies. I can tell you, I gained thousands of gold every time I saw that shrine, and I loved it. I thought it was amazing. There's also another one that's really awesome. I don't remember specifically what it's called, but it's this basically make shit go boom shrine, where every couple of seconds you let off a massive pulse of damage, and it just fucking kills everything around you. Great. But I could see that might find itself nerfed in the last build, because it was nice. But with that said, that's all I've got for you today, fellow Nephilim. In my next video, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the actual gameplay, but be sure to subscribe for my next video. I feel my love of Diablo being reignited, and thus on top of my planned Destiny 2 videos that I never seem to get around to doing, I will be putting out Diablo 4 content. Hell, even with all the other channels out there, I'll probably start talking through the lore, just to get me and anyone that views my channel up to date. I look forward to slaying the minions of hell with everyone in the open beta. Happy slaying.